I got kicked out of my house on Christmas Eve by my own mother. It still sounds ridiculous every time I say it, like the kind of thing you'd expect from a trashy reality TV show, but that was my reality. I was 28 at the time, still living at home, trying to pay off student loans while juggling 2 part-time jobs. My mom had always been a little intense, but that night she hit a new low. It all started with a Christmas tradition. Every year, my family held this big holiday dinner. I'd cook clean and set up the house while my mom took credit for being the perfect hostess. I didn't mind at first. I liked making things beautiful, loved the glow of lights against the winter darkness, the smell of cinnamon and pine. But the cracks had been showing for a while. The little digs about how I hadn't settled down yet, how my sister Rebecca was the real success of the family, married 2 kids, a nice suburban house. My sister had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, if I came home with a B, I got a lecture about not trying hard enough. Rebecca could show up with a C and get a hug for doing her best. When I got into my first choice college, my mom acted like I'd somehow cheated the system, like I didn't really belong there. But when Rebecca announced she was getting married at 23, it was like she'd won the damn Nobel Prize. My mom even took out a small loan to help cover the wedding while I had to scrape together every cent for my tuition. It stung, but I swallowed it because that's what I'd always done. That Christmas Eve, I should have known something was off. The way my mom had been extra tense, snapping at me for the smallest things. I burned the first batch of cookies, and she acted like I'd ruined the whole night. When I finally got the table set, candles lit, centerpiece arranged just right, she looked over everything and just sniffed. "It'll do," she said, as if I hadn't spent hours making it perfect. Guests started to arrive, family, friends, a couple of neighbors my mom was trying to impress. I kept myself busy in the kitchen, refilling drinks, plating hors d'oeuvres, and trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I knew how this night would go. My sister would float in perfect hair, perfect smile, her kids in matching red and green outfits. My mom would gush over them, probably whip out her phone to show off the latest pictures she'd received like they were royalty. And that's exactly what happened. Rebecca showed up, her husband in tow, their kids in tow, and my mom practically glowed. She didn't even notice I was still in the kitchen until an hour later, when she poked her head in to snap at me for not pouring the wine fast enough. Dinner was exactly what I'd expected, my sister holding court at one end of the table, my mom hanging on her every word. I tried to join in, but every time I opened my mouth, I got cut off, ignored, or outright talked over. It was like I was invisible. Then came the moment that finally shattered my patience. My mom clinked her glass, calling for everyone's attention. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd acknowledge my work for the night, maybe even say a quick thank you for the cooking and decorating. Instead, she raised her glass to Rebecca. "I just want to take a moment to say how proud I am of my beautiful daughter, Rebecca," she said, her voice thick with the wine I'd poured. "She's given me 2 perfect grandkids and built such a wonderful life. I'm so lucky to have a daughter like her." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked down at my plate, the edges of my vision going hot. She didn't even glance my way, didn't even acknowledge my existence. I was nothing but a shadow in the corner, the help. Everyone raised their glasses, murmuring cheers, clinking crystal like this was some royal affair. Rebecca beamed, basking in the attention, her husband squeezing her hand like they were the king and queen of this little suburban kingdom. When the toast ended, I stood up my chair, scraping against the hardwood floor with a sharp grating sound. The whole room paused, heads turning my way. "Thanks for the toast, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Nice to know where I stand." She blinked at me, confused, her smile faltering. "What's that supposed to mean?" She snapped, her voice, sharpening eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting a mouse. I could feel the eyes of a dozen relatives on me, the weight of years of being the overlooked daughter crashing down all at once. I swallowed, my throat tight. "It means maybe next year you should let Rebecca handle the cooking and decorating. I'm done." I grabbed my coat from the hall, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I heard my mom's voice rising behind me, something about being ungrateful, about ruining Christmas, but I didn't turn back. I walked out into the cold December night, the sharp air biting at my cheeks, my breath coming out in foggy bursts. As I reached my car, the tears finally broke free, freezing on my skin almost as quickly as they fell. I didn't know it then, but that was the last Christmas I'd spend with my family. It was the moment I finally chose myself over the toxic mess they'd wrapped me in my whole life. And it was just the beginning. I didn't hear from my mom for a week after that Christmas Eve disaster. I wasn't surprised. My family had a long history of cold shoulders and silent treatments. It was their favorite weapon, the sharp edge of a quiet phone line meant to cut deeper than any shouted argument. At first, it was a relief. I slept in for the first time in years on Christmas morning, made myself a cup of strong, bitter coffee, and sat on my tiny apartment balcony watching the snow-covered world slowly come to life. It felt like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. But as the days dragged on, the silence started to weigh on me. I'd catch myself glancing at my phone, half expecting my mom's name to pop up. I'd never admit it out loud, but part of me still hoped she might reach out, that she might apologize, or at least try to understand why I'd walked out. She didn't. Instead, my sister Rebecca called. I ignored her the first few times, letting the calls go to voicemail. But on New Year's Eve, after one too many glasses of wine and a bitter nostalgia creeping up my spine, I picked up. "Hey," I mumbled, leaning against the cold tile of my bathroom wall. Finally, she huffed like she'd been doing me a favor by calling. "Do you have any idea how much you upset Mom? She's been a wreck for days." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course, Mom was the victim. Always. "Rebecca, I don't want to do this," I said, my voice steady but low. "No, you need to hear this," she snapped. "You were completely out of line. You embarrassed her in front of the whole family. She's devastated." I let her rant for a full minute, the wine making her words blur together into a self-righteous drone. When she finally paused to breathe, I cut in. "Did she tell you what she said? That she stood up and made a toast to you, completely ignoring me in my own house after I'd cooked and cleaned for hours?" Rebecca hesitated, her tone dropping a fraction. "She didn't mean it like that." "Of course she didn't." I shot back, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "She never means it, right? But it still happens every damn time." There was a long silence on the line, the kind that stretches so thin you almost hear it crack. "Well, you should still apologize," she said, her voice cooler now, distant. "Mom's health isn't great, and this stress isn't helping." There it was, the emotional blackmail. The guilt card played perfectly. I should have expected it. "I have to go," I said, cutting her off before she could guilt me further. "Happy New Year." "Rebecca." I hung up before she could respond, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. The silence that followed felt heavier this time, like the air had thickened, pressing down on my chest. I started to pull back even more after that. I stopped checking the family group chat, let texts go unanswered, let birthdays pass without the usual cards or thoughtful messages. I could feel myself hardening, my edges sharpening, becoming someone I barely recognized, someone colder, tougher. My mother must have noticed, because a few weeks later, I came home to find a small stack of mail on my doorstep. I recognized my mom's precise, looping handwriting on the top envelope. I carried it inside, tossed it onto the kitchen counter, and stared at it for a long minute before finally tearing it open. Inside was a long, rambling letter, half apology, half guilt trip. She mentioned her health again, threw in a few lines about how she was just trying to keep the family together, how she loved me, how I was always so sensitive, always taking things the wrong way. At the end, she'd scrawled a hasty PS about how Rebecca had just announced she was pregnant again. I felt a familiar twist in my gut, a cold, sharp pain that cut deeper than any words. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball and tossed it in the trash. For the first time in my life, I felt something like resolve harden in my bones. I was done. It was a rainy Thursday morning when the truth finally cracked through the surface of my carefully ignored doubts. I was sitting at my desk, half listening to the steady patter of rain against my window, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Linda, my mom's older sister. She lived a few states away, rarely got involved in family drama, and mostly kept to herself. "Hey, can you call me when you have a minute? There's something we need to talk about." I frowned, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Aunt Linda wasn't the type to reach out without a reason. I dialed her number, the rain outside turning into a full-on downpour as the call connected. "Hey, Aunt Linda." I said, my voice echoing a bit in my quiet apartment. What's up? Listen, she said, her voice tense like she'd been pacing her kitchen for hours before deciding to call me. I've been sitting on this for a while and I just can't anymore. I need to tell you something and you're probably not going to like it. My stomach tightened. Okay, it's about your grandmother's will, she continued. Words coming faster now, as if she needed to get them out before her courage wavered. You know how she always said she'd split things evenly between you, Rebecca, and me? Well, that's not exactly what happened. I felt my pulse quicken. Grandma had passed away a few years back, and while I'd never expected much, I'd been told I'd get a small inheritance, something to help with my student loans, or maybe a down payment on a little house someday. I hadn't seen a dime. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Aunt Linda sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. After she died, your mom took control of everything. She convinced the family that it would be simpler if she managed the estate, and somehow the entire thing ended up in Rebecca's name. My mouth went dry. What? How is that even possible? She's been telling everyone that you didn't need the money, she said bitterly, her words coming out in a tight, angry whisper. That you were too irresponsible to handle it, that you'd just wasted on something stupid. She said you were still figuring things out, and it made more sense to put it in Rebecca's name. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. My own mother had cut me out, stolen what little my grandmother had meant to pass down to me, all while pretending to be the caring matriarch. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I whispered, my hand tightening around my phone. I thought it would come out eventually, Aunt Linda said, her voice dropping to a guilty whisper. I thought maybe your mom would do the right thing, or that Rebecca would share it with you. But I heard through the grapevine that Rebecca's putting a down payment on a lake house, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I felt something inside me crack a sharp, jagged break that left me cold and shaking. Thank you for telling me, I said, my voice flat, almost robotic. I hung up before she could say anything else, my mind reeling, the rain outside now matching the icy storm building in my chest. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking, and opened my laptop. If my mother wanted a family war, she was about to get one. I didn't waste any time. The next morning, I took the day off work, sat down at my tiny kitchen table, and started pulling every piece of paper, every email, every scrap of evidence I had about my grandmother's estate. I dug through old text messages, scrolled through family group chats, even found a few photos of my grandmother's old house before it had been sold. I also pulled up my last few tax returns, bank statements, and anything else that might paint a clearer picture of my financial standing. If my mother wanted to paint me as the irresponsible, directionless daughter, I was going to make damn sure that image shattered into 1,000 pieces. Once I had everything in one place, I called my friend Daniel. He worked at a small law firm downtown and owed me a few favors after I'd talked him through a rough breakup last year. Hey, Daniel, I said when he picked up, his voice groggy with sleep. Got a minute? Yeah, what's up? He mumbled, the sound of rustling sheets coming through the line. I need legal advice, I said, my voice tight, and maybe a little help getting some justice. By the time I hung up an hour later, my hands were shaking, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from something sharper, something colder. Rage. Daniel confirmed what I had suspected. If my mother had deliberately misrepresented my grandmother's wishes and manipulated the distribution of her estate, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was fraud. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I needed. I requested a copy of my grandmother's will from the county records office, pieced together my financial history, and even found a few old emails between my grandmother and me that hinted at her intentions to leave me a portion of her estate. Then I drafted a long, meticulously detailed letter to my mother, Rebecca, and every other family member who had been involved. I laid everything out, the stolen inheritance, the lies, the manipulation. I attached copies of the email's financial records and a copy of my grandmother's original will, which clearly named me as an equal beneficiary. I sent it out on a Friday morning just before leaving for work, my finger hovering over the send button for a full minute before I finally tapped the screen. That night, the calls started. My phone buzzed nonstop for hours. My mother, Rebecca, even a few aunts and uncles who had clearly been blindsided by the news. I let every single one of them go to voicemail. By the time I got home, my phone was vibrating with angry texts and missed call notifications. Rebecca's last text hit the hardest. "You're ruining this family. I hope you're happy." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, my fingers tightening around my phone. Ruining the family. No, they had done that themselves. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh wave of messages, but one stood out. It was from Aunt Linda. "You did the right thing. Don't let them bully you into silence." I felt my chest tighten, the last traces of guilt slipping away like the final wisps of fog burning off in the morning sun. It was time to stop being their doormat. The fallout hit harder than I expected. 2 days after I sent the letter, my phone finally stopped buzzing. The silence felt strange, like the moment after a storm when the air hangs thick and still, waiting for the next wave of chaos. I had half expected my mother to show up at my door, fury in her eyes, demanding an explanation, but she didn't. Instead, the quiet stretched on, oppressive and endless. Then on a gray Wednesday morning, an unfamiliar number popped up on my screen. I hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen, before finally answering. "Hello? Is this Lily?" a calm professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Marissa Chen, the estate attorney handling your grandmother's will. I received a call from your mother yesterday. She's requested a meeting to clarify some points you raised in your letter." I felt my heart rate spike, a cold prickle creeping up the back of my neck. "Clarify," I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Yes," the attorney said, her tone carefully neutral. "However, after reviewing the documents you provided, I believe there's little to clarify. In fact, it appears you have a strong case for both inheritance fraud and financial misconduct." I felt my jaw clench, my hand tightening around the edge of my kitchen counter. Should I get a lawyer?" I asked, my voice small but steady. "I would advise it," she said, a hint of warmth creeping into her tone. "And if you'd like, I can recommend a few colleagues who specialize in this sort of family dispute." We hung up a few minutes later, my mind whirling, my pulse thudding loud in my ears. That evening, I sat down with a glass of cheap wine, staring at the framed photo on my bookshelf, a rare candid shot of my grandmother and me from a summer picnic years ago. She was laughing, her eyes crinkled with genuine joy, her arm wrapped around my shoulder. I could almost hear her voice encouraging me to stand up for myself, to demand the respect I'd so long been denied. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless paperwork. I hired a lawyer, started building my case, and gradually began to reclaim the part of myself my family had tried to bury. Then one rainy afternoon, just as the first hints of spring were starting to break through the long winter gloom, I got a call from Aunt Linda. "They've hired a mediator," she said, her voice tight but tinged with something like relief. "Your mother's trying to avoid court." Of course she was. I almost laughed, the sound bitter and sharp in my own ears. She didn't want to face the humiliation, the public airing of her deceit. She just wanted everything swept neatly under the rug, the family image preserved, the lies safely tucked away. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice steady. The mediation came and went in a flurry of tense conversations and carefully worded legalese. My mother tried to play the victim, painting herself as a misunderstood matriarch just trying to do right by her children. Rebecca sat beside her, arms crossed, her eyes never once meeting mine. But my lawyer was relentless, methodical, cutting through their excuses with a precision that left no room for denial. In the end, I walked away with my share of the inheritance, a formal apology, and the quiet satisfaction of having finally broken free from their twisted web of lies and manipulation. A few weeks later, I got a text from Rebecca. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family." I didn't bother replying. Instead, I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the late afternoon sun warm my face, the weight of years of resentment and betrayal finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt free, and that I realized was worth more than any check they could have ever written. Story 2. Hello. I'm 29 years old, and my name is Brooklyn. This is the most important lesson I've ever learned. Not every bruise can be seen. Neglect and silence may cause some of the most severe injuries. By being raised in a home where people observe you but never really pay attention, That was my world. Oscar and Sandra had me as their second child. My parents are blood relatives, yet they are rarely affectionate. The son was Martin, my elder brother. All of them circled. It was not something he had to earn. There was nothing for him to prove. They gave him their eyes the instant he opened them in this world. Martin received cake for a B grade and accolades at every parent-teacher conference when I was growing up, while I received reprimands for anything less than flawless. They would feign a grin if I carried a school certificate home. Dad virtually had a celebration whenever Martin scored a goal in soccer. I stopped bringing them after a while. I have wonderful news. I realized early and quit trying to get their favor. They didn't want to brag about me as a kid. The toughest times were over the holidays. Martin received gym memberships, new shoes, and the newest technology. Every year, I received the same sentence, inexpensive sweaters and diaries. We are aware of your love for the little things. The presents weren't the source of the pain. It was the work. The reminder that I was the last thing on the list. My grandma Jennifer was the only person who ever gave me a sense of belonging. 2 towns away, she resided in a pretty brick home. Her hands were always working in the garden, folding clothes and baking. But whether I was 5 or 25, Mom never seemed too busy to sit with me. She gave me the impression that I was important. No forced grins or comparisons were made. Only love, sincerity, and the warmth I so much desired. "Brooklyn," she would say, holding my hand across the teacup, "you're not invisible. Not to me. They will eventually understand what they wasted." For years, I clung to those words. Each time I was held accountable for things I didn't accomplish while Martin received accolades for completing the bare minimum. Every time Mom boasted about Martin's phony business endeavors in public, she disregarded me. Grandma's voice came to mind every time my father ordered me to quit chasing attention when all I was trying to do was be heard. However, hope is brittle. When everyone around you acts as though you're in the way. For the most of my adolescence and early adulthood, I learned how to minimize my pain while avoiding conflict. Martin's engagement was made possible by me. I volunteered to do wedding-related errands. Mom bought a luxury gown for my future sister-in-law, Vanessa, purely for pictures, and I kept silent when she handed me a worn dress to wear as a bridesmaid. I completed everything. I still thought that if I was nice enough, kind enough, and helpful enough, maybe one day they would love me too, not because I was weak. I was mistaken because I was unaware that they had plans much more sinister than simply ignoring me. They intended to obliterate me entirely. And a lie was the beginning of it all. A lie so loud and so well-placed that it would almost ruin me. But not before it revealed every murky aspect of the reality they were attempting to conceal. The incident took place on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I had just finished helping Jennifer plant lavender in her backyard garden when she beckoned me in for tea on one of those calm, gloomy days that evoke memories like threads. The air smelled of fresh dirt and honey, and the kettle hissed on the burner. Her house gave me a sense of peace, security, and visibility. We took a seat at the little round table beside the window. She extracted a sizable envelope from the side drawer. When she put it in front of me, her face was serious, but I thought it may be old letters or recipes. "For a long time, I've been intending to show you this." "Brooklyn," she replied softly. "The time has come." Where inside, I slowly went through the official paperwork, property deeds, bank records, and a copy of her final will and testament. As I started to comprehend what I was looking at, the house, her money, and a substantial stock portfolio, my fingers started to shake a little. In all, jewelry has been handed down through the centuries. The whole estate, valued at around $4 million, was being bequeathed to me. Tears filled my eyes. "Why me, Grandma?" She put her hand over mine and reached across the table. "Because you've earned what they took for granted throughout your life. I saw how they handled you, how they made you feel insignificant while elevating Martin. You didn't ever snap. You never gave up. They will never comprehend the strength you possess." I was at a loss for words. I couldn't speak for a change. To prevent drama, she might have divided the estate and handed it all to Martin. However she chose me. Not because I inquired. I had just put up with it, not because I asked for it. She made it plain that she had not yet told anyone. Not even my folks. They'll sense it, though, I'm sure. She sighed as she spoke. Martin, that boy in particular, is really envious, and she was absolutely correct. At first it was subtle. Stop responding to my texts, Martin. He would make jokes that sounded more like jabs if I showed up for a family gathering. Be careful, everybody. It's likely that Brooklyn is here to make notes for her estate. Grandma's particular idea must be wonderful to know. He had a suspicion, but no concrete knowledge. And that mistrust became poison. Mom began to remark that certain people were constantly attempting to control the elderly. When the wheel is red, Dad would laugh and remark, "I can't wait to see who's really loyal." They were being subtle, they believed. They weren't. Let them chat, Jennifer kept telling me. People will attack your name when they don't have your work. It was more than just words, though. Martin had a plan. Something unsightly. It would distort everything I held dear and turn it into a weapon, and he would hit me without warning. The day of his wedding, Martin's wedding, came with phony grins and ideal weather. As you might think, the location was a lavish lakeside house with crystal chandeliers, white flowers, and an aisle long enough to accommodate a fashion runway. Every detail said, "Look at me," which, to be honest, was ideal for my brother. My grandma had given me a delicate blue dress which I wore. Tasteful, yet not ostentatious or inexpensive. Where I could, I offered assistance, arranging flowers and soothing Vanessa. When the planner forgot the coffee, they had to arrange the seating chart. Martin and my parents weren't the reason I did it. For Vanessa, I did it. I always got along well with her, and she had never made me feel like I didn't belong, even if we weren't really close. When I got there, though, I could sense the tension. I was hardly recognized by my parents. Sandra smiled at me, but it was just a half grin. Oscar completely avoided me. Martin treated me as if I were just another visitor. Not his sister, not someone who had put in the extra effort to make the event go more smoothly. The primary audience did not include Jennifer. She was seated close to the front. As usual, calm and quiet. Throughout the ceremony, I looked at her many times. Her eyes were warm with certainty as she nodded slightly each time. The ceremony was lovely, in its own right. Naturally. Under a white rose arch, Martin and Vanessa exchanged vows, and there was a little clap from everyone. Peace seemed to have come, if only momentarily. But in a home where animosity is the foundation, peace does not endure. The DJ turned down the music for the speeches later in the reception. People toasted the couple one by one. Jokes were told by the best man. After a charming tale from Vanessa's maid of honor, Martin took the mic. As soon as he began speaking, I realized something was amiss. He had no smile on his face. His voice trembled with tightly controlled rage rather than emotion. "I've got something to say." He started looking around the throng. Even though it's difficult, I can't pretend that everything is all right on the most significant day of my life. The room became silent. The servers themselves froze. He went on, "I learned this morning that someone I trusted who is very close to me stole $150,000 from us. Our honeymoon budget. It's gone." Like a ripple on water, a gasp swept across the crowd. Then he spoke it. It was Brooklyn, my sister. My blood froze. My stomach dropped. There was a moment, just one, where I thought he was joking, that this was some kind of messed up attempt at humor, but his expression. Ice cold. I stood there in complete shock. "What are you discussing?" He turned to me in front of everyone. "Don't play dumb. You had access to the documents. You helped with the planning. You knew exactly where the payments were scheduled." "That's not true," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't touch anything. I didn't even know where that money was kept." Vanessa looked confused, her eyes darting between us. She hadn't expected this. No one had. Then Sandra stood up from her table, her voice shrill. "How could you, Brooklyn? At your own brother's wedding. You've embarrassed us enough." Oscar's jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists. I could feel something dark building inside him. Something far more dangerous than words. Martin wasn't just angry. He was acting. He had rehearsed this. He wanted the world to see me as a criminal. And in that moment, no one, not even I, could have guessed how far my father was about to take it. I barely had time to react. My heart pounded so hard. I could feel it in my throat. All eyes were on me, and every second felt like a spotlight burning into my skin. Then it happened. Oscar. My father stood up so fast his chair screeched across the floor. His face was flushed red, eyes wild with fury. Without saying a word, he marched across the hall like a man possessed. The wedding photographer who had just completed getting the last group portrait stood at the front with his DSLR camera set on a professional gimbal. Oscar stormed right toward him. "Hey, gentlemen, please don't touch that." The photographer called, puzzled, but it was too late. Oscar snatched the camera off the gimbal with both hands, jerked the gadget out of its stabilizing grasp, and then still gripping it by the gimbal like a club, turned around and stormed right toward me. I didn't even move. I couldn't. My body froze in amazement. All I managed was a mumbled "Dad." And then he swung, the hefty camera still attached to its base, crashed against the side of my forehead with a force so intense it seemed like thunder erupted in my skull. I plummeted, suddenly tumbling sideways against a table glass. Shattered plates smashed to the floor. Someone yelled. The pain came in waves, acute and blinding. My brain ached. My ears sounded like a fire alarm, and blood flowed down my temple. I had trouble opening my eyes. In my mouth, I tasted metal. The guests let out a gasp. Some people had their lips covered. Others recoiled in dread as they heard my ears ring. Sandra's voice was audible to me. Out loud. Poisonous. She was worthy. She is a thief and a liar. I brought up a monster. Nobody stood up for me. Only one person. Enough, Jennifer was the one. With the vigor that only an enraged grandma can muster, she pushed through the crowd. She had no tears in her eyes. They were on fire. Beside me, she fell to her knees and yelled, "Now dial 911. She took out her phone and did it herself when no one reacted quickly enough. She spoke in a steely tone to the dispatcher. At a wedding, my granddaughter was attacked in front of 200 people. Brain injury. Blood is present. I really need the cops and an ambulance. There are 3 people engaged in the assault. Her brother, mother, and father. I'll testify against each and every one of them." I recall holding her hand while I was slipping in and out of consciousness. She had powerful fingers. Steady. Police and paramedics showed up in a matter of minutes. The wedding venue was illuminated like a murder scene by the flashing red and blue lights. And it had turned into just that. Officers surrounded Martin, Sandra, and Oscar as I was being placed onto the stretcher. However, an amazing incident occurred before anybody could be removed. My grandma, my pillar of support. Jennifer approached the microphone at the front of the gathering. She cleared her throat. The visitors looked at her, startled into silence. With a strong, unflinching voice, she remarked, raising her hand, "I want everyone here to hear what I have to say before these 3 are taken away." The room fell quiet. The faint static of the microphone in Jennifer's fingers, the buzzing of the lights, and the far-off sirens slowly dying in the distance were all audible. Now everyone was watching her. This lady in a lavender clothing looks elegant, standing in a courtroom like a judge, composed of gilt and flowers. She was standing next to the cops getting ready to arrest Oscar, Sandra, and Martin. They didn't even glance at her. They were unable to. This young woman, my granddaughter Brooklyn, has suffered a lifetime of neglect, verbal abuse, and now physical assault, not from strangers, but from the very people who are supposed to love her the most, Jennifer continued after taking a deep breath. In the audience, there were whispers. A few visitors gave slow nods. Others simply gazed with wide eyes. I want to be clear. Brooklyn has been officially named as the recipient of my entire estate, which includes every house account investment and treasure worth $4 million. I was the only one who made that choice. She has shown herself deserving of my trust and my legacy, not because she pleaded for it or tried to deceive me. Vanessa put her hand to her mouth as she stood at the edge of the crowd. Tears filled her eyes not only from shock, but also from comprehension. As she turned to face Oscar, these three Jennifers spoke. Not only have Martin and Sandra embarrassed themselves. Out of sheer greed and animosity, they have tried to ruin someone. And I'll be pushing for each of them to face criminal charges. They are not deserving of being taken away today alone. They should be recognized for who they truly are: dangerous, cowardly, and cruel. Among the guests was a murmur of agreement. A few gave a gentle clap. Some people sobbed. After giving Jennifer a polite nod, the officers escorted the three of them. They were now fully stripped of their phony superiority and headed for the door. At that moment, Vanessa came forward. She went over to Martin, whose hands were already secured behind his back, and everyone turned. The wooden floor made a harsh clicking sound when her heels touched it. She had an expressionless, blank face. Chilly. She remained silent. Rather, she removed her diamond engagement ring, reached out, and let it fall at his feet. Clink! After one bounce, it landed on the bottom of his dress shoes. "We're done," she muttered. Permanently. Her parents abandoned Martin and left with her, clearly embarrassed and furious. Martin remained silent. He was unable to. His scarlet face was contorted in bewilderment and incredulity, as if he was unable to comprehend that his falsehoods had been exposed in public. There was silence in the room as the officers led them out. As the paramedics fastened my stretcher, Jennifer quickly raced to my side, turning away from the microphone. She said to the EMTs, "I'm going with her. Don't even consider preventing me." They didn't. The shutters of cameras and the muttering of the journalists reverberated from outside as the doors opened. However, I had stopped hearing it. As we drove away in the ambulance, I could only feel my grandmother's fingers firmly grasp mine. And I experienced something strong for the first time in my life. Nor embarrassment, nor fear. Fairness. Getting up at last. The ambulance left the scene of the incident. However, the wedding was disintegrating into dust behind us. What should have been a picture-perfect celebration had devolved into an immense controversy. Decorations were being torn down by the venue workers. Outside guests stood in small groups, checking their phones for updates and murmuring in disbelief. A few were phoning ride-sharing services. Others simply departed without saying anything. However, one thing was evident. The nuptials were over. Don't dance, not a cake, no. The first dance. Only humiliation and shackles within the ambulance. The paramedics did their best to gently wipe the blood from my forehead. One of them replied, "You're lucky," in a low voice. The camera struck hard. "Your skull could have been broken." I gave a feeble nod. Still in a fog. Not only because it hurt, but also because it was all so chaotic. Jennifer sat next to me and kept my hand throughout. She didn't weep. She spoke without faltering. She simply remained constant. Robust like an oak tree's roots, refusing to lose your temper at the hospital. When the ER arrived, I was hurried into observation. My forehead cut was cleansed, sutures were put in, and a CT scan was performed to rule out internal bleeding. Fortunately, the findings were unambiguous. No long-term harm. However, they spent days warning me about possible bruises and migraines. Jennifer went outside to answer calls in the interim. By the time she got back, she had already made contact with a lawyer, scheduled a consultation with Mark Wilson, and made arrangements for a police statement to be obtained while I was sleeping. She came back to my bedside and said, "You don't have to worry. I'm taking care of it. You just concentrate on getting better." However, I wasn't finished resting in that hospital bed, listening to the monitors beep and gazing at the ceiling tiles. I decided I wasn't going to recover in silence. I was going to stand up for every birthday, not just for what they did during the wedding. They disregarded all of the lies. They disseminate all insults. They pretended to be advise. I unlocked my phone and started writing down everything that night after the nurses had turned down the lights and Jennifer had curled up on the gas chair. The incidents, the suffering, the evidence. Because we were going to battle tomorrow. And I had the truth on my side this time. Sunlight filtered through my hospital room's blinds the following morning. It was golden and soft, as if it was unaware that the world had collapsed the previous evening. My head hurt. Above my temple, the stitches are still fresh. But my judgment was no longer affected by the discomfort. It made it sharper. It didn't break me. I felt aware and alive, all set. With her reading glasses perched on the top of her nose and her phone in one hand, Jennifer was already dressed and stood by the window. Like a general getting ready for battle, she had been up early making calls, planning the next course of action. Calmly, she put her phone in her handbag and stated, "You have an appointment at 2 p.m. The state's top lawyer, Mark Wilson, is well versed in dealing with those who believe they are untouchable." I forced myself into a sitting position. Everything is being filed. She gave a nod. Everything. By the afternoon, I was sitting across from Mark Wilson, a shrewd-eyed man in his 40s who exuded confidence without having to speak. Law books and framed headlines of court victories adorned his office. The way he listened not just to answer, but to understand, was what most comforted me, though. I took him through every detail, including the physical attack, in front of more than 200 people, the whispered remarks and the years of neglect, names, dates, and even written notes that Jennifer had discreetly recorded throughout the years were used to bolster my story. I then gave the USB disc to him. It included everything. Audio of Sandra calling me a thief, a video recordings of the wedding guests, cell phone clips of Oscar swinging the camera, a Jennifer's speech at the microphone, Vanessa dropping the engagement ring at Martin's feet, and numerous screenshots of Martin's prior texts attempting to scare me into avoiding getting involved in Grandma's legal matters. Mark silently went over everything. He folded his hands and leaned back when he was done. "It's not only a family problem. This is malevolent intent to prevent inheritance, criminal assault, and slander. All three are subject to charges. Martin, Oscar, and Sandra." I gave a nod. "And a public is what I desire. I've come out of hiding." "That's good," he replied, "since we'll be bringing civil and criminal cases, one for damages, the other for justice. And trust me, this will be taken seriously by the court." Despite having resources, influence, and witnesses, they continued to choose violence. Jennifer took out her packet of files. Well prepared, stapled, tabbed. A copy of my will is attached. It was notarized beforehand. Brooklyn is named as the only inheritor of my $4 million fortune. They attempted to destroy her before it could happen because they knew this was coming. Mark spoke quietly and definitively. Then we'll make sure they regret trying. I signed each paper that night. Official affidavits, legal authorizations, and assault reports. I provided the police my whole video statement, and I even granted the hospital personnel permission to publish my medical record as proof. I was no longer only a sister or a daughter. I was a survivor and a plaintiff, and I had power they couldn't take away for the first time in my life. The fragrance of ancient wood and floor polish filled the courthouse, too silent, formal, and cold. However, as soon as I entered, accompanied by Jennifer and lawyer Mark Wilson, I had the impression that I was entering something far more sacred than a structure. Here, the murmurs would give way to evidence, and the falsehoods would ultimately perish, where the truth would no longer be sorry. Martin, Oscar, and Sandra sat at the defendant's table wearing formal attire that made them appear uneasy. They appeared to be still attempting to maintain some kind of dignity as seen by their rigid facial expressions. However, the true narrative was revealed by their eyes. Fear, shame, anger. It was different on my side of the room. Jennifer sat behind me with her chin up and her hands folded neatly in her lap. Mark was standing to my left, calm and confident with his laptop open and his papers neatly organized. I inhaled deeply and recalled the sting of stitches and the hospital monitoring. My father's angry voice slammed into my head. They no longer frightened me. The prosecution played the wedding video on the large screen to start the trial. There were gasps and horrified quiet in a room that had been a place of applause and rejoicing. Sandra yelled, "She deserves it." And many jurors cringed as Oscar struck me with the DSLR camera. A woman in the gallery muttered, "My God," in the background. Jennifer's speech followed. "My whole $4 million fortune is being lawfully transferred to Brooklyn." The courtroom shook as though it had suddenly discovered the true reason for everything. The medical records followed. Our attending physician provided a Zoom testimony, describing the extent of my head injury, the edema, and the danger I had encountered. Then Vanessa arrived. Like a silk-clad hurricane, she entered the courtroom. "Be calm," written. Every one of Martin's falsehoods was exposed by her evidence. No honeymoon fund has ever existed. The narrative was made up by Martin the night before the wedding. He told Sandra he was going to make Brooklyn pay and destroy her in front of everyone after a strange phone conversation. He informed me. "Grandma might change the will if he could make her look like a thief," she remarked, addressing the jurors directly. For a minute, Mark let that sentence hanging. Pulling a pin from a grenade and setting it in the center of the room was like that. Jennifer's testimony followed, sharp, solid, and serene. She described to the judge how she had seen Brooklyn endure years of silent suffering, how her bravery and honesty led her to be selected as her inheritor. This attack wasn't an accident, she made plain. It was the last in a long line of mistreatment. At last, I got up. I described to the jury how Oscar and Sandra always made Martin the center of the world when I was a kid, how I ended up being forgotten in my own house. I talked about the wedding minute by time and what it was like to be publicly and physically abused, as though my existence was completely unimportant to them. I'm not here to exact retribution. I came here because I will never be free if I allow them to silence me again, I said. Furthermore, I refuse to lead a tranquil life in order to preserve the reputation of those who shattered me when I sat down. The room was so quiet that it seemed like stone. The defense attempted to characterize everything as a familial miscommunication. However, the jurors didn't believe it. The witness statements, the text messages, the audio, and the video, they were unavoidable. That same day, the verdict was rendered. I feel guilty. Oscar received a 3-year jail term for violent assault. Sandra was sentenced to 18 months for emotional abuse and complicity. Martin, the mastermind, received a 2-year sentence for malicious intent to hinder inheritance, false allegation, and slander. I will never forget the judge's parting remarks. Violence under the guise of familial devotion is not acceptable in this court. Favoritism and abuse are not protected by the law. The bailiffs escorted them out. I didn't grin. I refrained from crying. All I did was breathe. It felt, for the first time in a very long time, that justice was a reality. The freedom I gained from the courtroom followed me everywhere. I sat with Jennifer at her house a week after the trial. She had given me that package of legal documents months prior, and we were sitting at the same table, our safe haven. There were no cautions or hints of what may happen this time. There was just tranquility this time. "This is the last transfer," she murmured quietly, taking out a huge folder of papers and setting a gold pen next to it. "The assets, the house, the accounts. You now own everything. Brooklyn, it's finished." For the first time, someone trusted me enough to offer me everything without expecting me to be anything other than myself, so I swallowed hard, not because I wasn't ready. I carefully and gently signed the documents. After I finished, Jennifer said, "My girl, you've turned pain into power," as she leaned over and placed her palm on mine. "Now put it to use." And I did. I didn't take a Caribbean trip or relocate to a home in the hills with the bequest. No, I took part of the money and utilized it to create something long-lasting. I came into the Haven Project, a nonprofit organization that specializes in assisting young people and women who have experienced emotional trauma. Unfair allegations or neglect in the family, I am liked by others. Those in need of a secure environment, to be heard, to get better without being kept silent. For victims of psychological or domestic violence, we provided legal assistance. For people escaping harmful familial situations, emergency lodging is available. Counseling for mental health. Workshops on financial planning. And community, above all. Jennifer became our counselor and honorary co-founder. She was not going to retire. She brought fresh tea, strong advice, and her immaculately ironed shirt and pearls to the workplace every morning. She was referred to as Grandmother J by everybody, and she is loved by everybody. We grew quickly. Our facility was servicing more than 100 families in only 6 months. Nobody ever said I thought I was the only one for more than a week. You're not invisible. Jennifer reminded me every time I informed them, no more. I was more than simply mending myself, therefore I threw all of my energies into that spot. I was assisting others in finding their voice again before shame or guilt buried it. My parents are still serving their sentences in prison. Martin, he failed in his attempt to appeal his sentence. After being released, he reportedly relocated to a different state, and as of the last time I looked, he was having difficulty finding employment. I didn't forgive him, but I also didn't want him to suffer. Vanessa, she once paid me a visit. We drank coffee. She said she was sorry. She never owed me one, I informed her. I didn't hold it against her since she had faith in Martin. We had a cordial separation. Jennifer and I, on the other hand, kept expanding the Haven Project together while grinning at the news articles we were assisting in creating and laughing about old memories. Because there's no better sense of serenity than providing a path for someone else to climb out to after you've escaped hell. It's interesting how life can seem like a storm for so long that you're unsure of what to do when things finally settle down. On certain evenings after everyone has gone home, I sit on the Haven Project's porch. I watch the lights flicker across the flower beds we constructed together while drinking chamomile tea from my grandmother's favorite porcelain mug, Daisy Lavender. Sunflowers. Flowers that, despite tough soil, do not wither. Like myself, I frequently reflect on how nearly I was removed from both my identity and the family history. How quickly a falsehood may spread when it comes from the individuals you used to trust the most. The wrath of a father, the blind cruelty of a mother, and the jealousy of a brother. Everyone in the room is prepared to assume the worst. Concerning a lady who never harmed them. I no longer live in that tale, though. I'm living in a different era. One where truth yelled aloud, justice substituted quiet, and the ones who had broken me were revealed beneath the courtroom lights. One in which the lady whom everyone sought to eradicate penned her own history. Do the scars still hurt occasionally? Are the recollections still painful? Indeed, however, they no longer characterize me. Right now, the ladies that enter our doors each week determine who I am, leaving with dignity despite bearing shame and dread. Jennifer's hand defines who I am. You are enough every time she says it. And occasionally, I remember that hospital moment, bruised, broken, and humiliated. And I picture myself whispering, "Just wait," to that version of myself. I've already written your ending, so they can't write it. I'm Brooklyn, and I'm no longer the girl they attempted to quiet, the scapegoat sister or the neglected daughter. I am a leader, a survivor, and a creator of safe spaces despite those who believed they could destroy me. They merely made me more aware of how indestructible I really am. Please remember to like the video if this tale touched you or caused you to reconsider the importance of justice and the truth. For more impactful real-life tales every week, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel. We can keep voicing voices that should be heard thanks to your support. Thank you for seeing, and never forget. Never does the truth remain hidden for very long.
Story 5. I almost dropped my phone in horror when I saw my mother's name flash over the screen. Her calls were as seldom as eclipses of the sun. In the last 5 years, exactly twice. Once to tell me of Aunt Meredith's passing. Additionally, I casually mentioned that my sister was getting married. I didn't receive an invitation to the wedding, naturally. "Hi there," I gave a cautious response. "Erica." The tone of her speech remained flat. I recalled. "This weekend your sister Vanessa and her spouse will be in town. They would want you to join them for supper on Friday at 6 o'clock. She hung up after that. I gazed at my mobile device. Even at 30, I still feel like the unwanted kid. I had the option to decline, most likely should have. However, a part of me that still yearned for their acceptance consented to leave. Friday came sooner than I had hoped. I didn't want to bother with parking, so I took a cab. Before long, I was standing in front of my parents' modest suburban house, the same house where I had grown up feeling inconspicuous next to my sister who was my golden child. I knocked on the door after smoothing down my understated yet professional black outfit. No response. I walked inside after testing the handle and discovering it was unlocked. From the dining room came the sound of conversational laughing. It sounded like a big family reunion, not just my sister and dad as promised. Fantastic. More evidence of my never-ending disillusionment. Situation. I observed the same thing when standing at the dining room doorway. At either end of the table are my parents. Every other chair was occupied by Vanessa and her husband, who occupied one side like royalty, and several aunts, uncles, and cousins. My sister was the center of attention. By summer, the second location ought to be operational. Vanessa was saying, making a lot of gestures. "Aren't you, honey? Brian's business is just blowing up." Brian. Her husband gave a smug nod. I only knew that he had a car repair shop because cousin Amy would occasionally text me about it. Caleb is already using complete sentences and engaging in family gossip. Vanessa went on mentioning her son, who is 2 years old. He is advanced for his age, according to the pediatrician. My mom grinned proudly. Dad gave a nod of approval. The gathered family members uttered the proper applause. I was still unnoticed. I stood clumsily at the doorway looking around for a seat, but there wasn't one. Normal. Not that I was supposed to remain. Then Vanessa's smile changed as her gaze came to rest on me. It's different, yet still there. Sharper, somehow. Look who has finally made up their mind to join us. With a loud announcement, she called everyone's attention to me. "Erica, come on in. For once, sit among successful folks." I grinned to myself but said nothing, and Linda moved her chair over to make room at the table's corner. Squeezing in, I balanced on the seat's edge. Vanessa went on as I was saying. "Here in town, we're opening the second location. Brian's going to commute between both stores until he finds a boss he trusts." My parents gladly nodded. "I'm really proud, as is your dad," Mom remarked, extending her hand to pat Vanessa's. "For yourself, you've done really well." After a minute of reveling in the praise, Vanessa abruptly turned to face me. With a fake sweetness in her voice, she replied, "So, Erica, are you still employed at that restaurant as a waitress?" There was silence at the table. Everyone looked at me. I had, in fact, begun working as a waitress immediately following high school. My parents claimed to be saving money for Vanessa's schooling. Therefore, they had declined to assist with her college expenses. I had to fend for myself. "Yes," I said plainly, still in the same eatery. I didn't go into detail or specify my precise role. Let them make their own assumptions. Then she let forth a sound like glass shattering as she laughed. "Erica, you're 30 years old and still carrying plates for tips. You've always been such a failure, God." The family members laughed. My parents nodded in accord and exchanged knowing looks. Instead of feeling offended, I chose to grin to myself. If only they were aware. In fact, Vanessa declared, grabbing everyone's attention with a clap of her hands. "There's a reason I brought you all together. Brian and I plan to take everyone out to supper at the city's top restaurant on Saturday of next week, to commemorate his accomplishment. It will be incredible." Murmurs of excitement echoed around the table. Everyone appeared happy until Vanessa came around to face me. "Except from you, Erica. You're not invited." She had a poisonous smile. "Nice. You're too impoverished to attend a family gathering at such a location. You'd be out of place." My mom interrupted before I could reply. "Unless, of course, you are a waitress there. At least then you could help us." There was laughing around the table. I could see them all anticipating my response, anticipating pleas, tears, and shame. Rather, I wiped my mouth with a tissue. finished the meal on my plate quietly, and remarked, "I would insist you all enjoy yourselves." If they hadn't been my family, their sad expressions would have been hilarious. When it became evident that I would not give them the breakdown of emotions they had hoped for, they didn't care about me for long. The topic of the forthcoming dinner came up again: what they would order and which restaurant they would visit. Where would people sit? I slipped away from the table, grabbed my purse, and called a cab. Nobody saw me go. Nobody bid farewell. I was dropped off at my building, a posh high-rise in the heart of downtown, by the taxi. As I made my way through the marble lobby to the private elevator that took me straight to my penthouse apartment, the doorman called out to me by name. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony as I poured myself a glass of pricey wine and kicked off my shoes. I was still viewed by my family as the unfortunate waitress. The failure of the family. They were unaware of my transformation. I kept thinking about the beginning of it all. I began working part-time at a seedy downtown cafe when I was 16. I had to do it not because I wanted to. "I need new jeans, Mom. There are holes in these." One day after school, I begged. She was assisting Vanessa with her science project and hardly looked up. "Erica, stop being so demanding. Every time you desire new clothing, we can't afford to buy them for you." While I was still using a flip phone from 3 years ago, Vanessa had the newest iPhone and her closet was overflowing with brand new clothes. So I got the cafe job. The pay was terrible, the hours long, but it meant freedom. I stopped asking my parents for anything. Bought my own clothes, my own phone, my own life. I remember overhearing my mother at a family dinner when I was 17. "Erica will probably be a waitress all her life," she told E.T. "Linda, she's not bright or gifted like Vanessa at 18. After high school graduation, the ultimate blow came. "We can't help with your college fees. My father declared we're saving for Vanessa's schooling. She has enormous promise." That night, I packed my belongings and fled home. I landed a job at a restaurant in the city center. Not prominent, but they recruited everyone willing to work hard. I moved into a tiny apartment with 2 other waiters, Maria and Jen. We barely made ends meet, but at least I was spared from my family's relentless comparisons. I'd see images on social media of Vanessa visiting beach resorts with my parents, or skiing in Colorado, or exploring Europe. Then came the happy announcement of her attending college, the education my parents couldn't afford for me but somehow managed for her. I ignored their ideas and concentrated on my work. Despite having a fantastic downtown position, Bellini's was having financial difficulties. The design was out of date, the cuisine was average, and the service was patchy. However, I never grumbled, studied everything I could, and showed up every day. I paid for my own restaurant management classes at the community college, 1 class at a time during my free time. Marketing techniques, personnel management, engineering menus, and restaurant financing. After working at Bellini's for 2 years, I saw that things were becoming worse. Weekly decline in clientele, increased worker turnover, and food waste. I saw Robert Dawson, the proprietor, sitting by himself with a drink of whiskey one evening after closure, looking at spreadsheets. "Mr. Dawson, is everything all right?" As I was cleaning tables, I inquired. He let out a deep sigh. "Not at all. Erica is considering rebranding or selling. It's dying here." After hesitating, I plucked up the confidence. "Rebranding isn't going to help." He jerked his head up. "Please pardon me. I'm sorry, but that's reality. Neither the name nor the logo are the issue. The idea itself is the problem." I thought he would become irate, but instead, he pointed to the chair opposite from him. "Give me additional details." So I did. I clarified that our chef only created 3 of the 20 previous additions on our menu, which was too long. How then we didn't have the quality to support the costs, despite our best efforts to appear upscale. How our short hours were causing us to entirely miss the lunch crowd. What would you do differently? He inquired about his interest in genuinely concentrating on our strengths. Reduce the menu to a total of 15 items, the ones that people genuinely place orders for. Establish tiers of pricing, provide reasonably priced lunch alternatives and high-end supper options, and launch a delivery service for those who work late in the nearby office buildings. Robert gazed at me. "Where did you find out about all of this?" "For 2 years, I saw this firm lose money while taking management classes at the community college." His laughter was one of astonishment rather than derision. "Erica, what is your age? 22? Slowly, Robert nodded. "How would you feel about managing Bellini's new restaurant?" "Assist me in putting these modifications into effect. I need someone who is knowledgeable about this industry's theory and reality. Someone who sees issues and solutions rather than just grievances. After 2 weeks, I had a tiny office of my own and the daunting task of turning a failing restaurant around. It was both thrilling and terrifying. I oversaw a small renovation that gave the establishment a more modern feel while working 18-hour days, redesigning menus, retraining employees, and setting up new procedures. Without being fashionable, Bellamy's headlines went out the door 6 months later. Throughout lunch and dinner, our delivery service was operating continuously. We would increase revenue by 45% while reducing expenses by 30%. We added a second store across town and a third in the financial district within 2 years. Because we had nearly perfected our plan, we were successful right away. Robert invited me to supper on my 24th birthday. Not at one of our eateries, but at the city's most upscale establishment. "For you, I have a suggestion." After we placed our purchase, he remarked, "I want to make you a partner." 30% of all of our group's restaurants both present and prospective. My drink almost suffocated me. That is overly giving. It isn't giving, it's business. 3 thriving restaurants have been created out of 1 failed one by you. Before someone else snatches you away, I would be foolish if I didn't lock you in as a companion. Everything changed that night. I was no longer only a worker, I was a proprietor. After that, we quickly grew, adding 2 additional sites in less than a year. By the time I turned 26, I purchased my condo in a penthouse. I established my own investing portfolio by the time I was 28. Even while my family still believed that I was carrying dishes for tips, I now at the age of 30 managed 8 prosperous restaurants with more than 200 staff members. A notification rang on my phone, bringing me back to the present. Our reservation manager at the original Balinese site, Melissa, sent out a message confirming a large group reservation for next Saturday at 7 p.m. Vanessa Cooper is her name. After looking at the message for a while, I started chuckling. For her large family gathering, my sister had picked my restaurant out of all the ones in the city. That's the party I didn't deserve to be at. I was anxiously anticipating Saturday for the entire week before. I experienced an odd mixture of exhilaration and dread whenever I imagined my family entering my business without realizing it was mine. During our weekly management meeting, Robert observed that I was preoccupied. "Is everything all right?" When everyone else had left the meeting room, he inquired, "You don't seem right today." Over the years, Robert had become into more than just a business associate. He was my buddy, my mentor, and the closest thing I had to family these days. When they realized I had nowhere else to go for holidays, his wife Diane and their children would frequently invite me over. On Saturday, my sister is taking my whole family to Bellini's. I described the first place. He raised his eyebrows. "These are the same folks that believe you are still a waiter. The people who didn't extend an invitation to you for dinner?" I gave a nod. "That's convenient then." A little grin appeared on his face. "Will you let them know I'm considering it?" Robert reclined on his seat. "I've known you for 8 years, Erica. My business has been rebuilt and developed beyond my wildest expectations by you. And aside from those individuals, you have never once requested praise from anybody else. Don't act as though you don't care about this." He was correct. A part of me still yearned for my family's acceptance despite all of my accomplishments, or at the very least, wanted to see their expressions when they saw how mistaken they had been about me. By agreement, I'll be there. When Saturday night finally arrived, I was really anxious. An hour prior to my family's reservation, I arrived to Bellini's to make sure everything was in order. I didn't have to. Although our crew was flawless, it provided me with a task. I put on my executive name badge, which said it all, and a fitted black dress. Owner and Executive Director Erica Mitchell. After that, I waited in my office, which had a glass window that looked out over the main dining area. My parents, Vanessa and Brian. A number of aunts and uncles and a couple of cousins arrived together. There were 14 individuals in all dressed to the nines. I observed the host guiding them to our best table, a big round table in the middle of the dining room that Melissa had reserved without my request. Vanessa was obviously the center of attention as she held court and made ostentatious gestures. My parents nodded in agreement with everything she said, beaming with pride. I felt as though a scene from my early years was being reenacted. I remained in my office until they had placed their appetizer and drink orders, then inhaling deeply. I went outside and approached their table slowly. I was first noticed by my cousin Amy. She didn't say anything, but her eyes widened a little. Then the others saw me coming one by one. Look who it is then. Vanessa made a strong announcement. Will you serve as our waitress this evening? How ideal. Calmly, I grinned. As a matter of fact, I will not be able to serve you tonight. Too preoccupied with other tables. Brian grinned. Too busy managing the eatery. I pointed to my name in response. Badge and our group's 7 other members. The ensuing hush was deafening. My mother's jaw dropped. An intriguing hue of crimson appeared on my father's face. Vanessa appeared to have been smacked. This place is yours. At last, my dad was able to inquire. I checked with Robert Dawson Cohen. It's been 6 years since we became partners. However, you claim to still be employed at the same eatery. It was uttered accusingly by my mother. I am. I simply did not state my role. I gave a shrug. You didn't inquire. The first person to get well was Linda, who had seated me at the family supper. This is amazing, Erica. The eatery is stunning. You must be really proud. Everyone wanted to talk to me all of a sudden. What had I done? When did this occur? How come I hadn't told them? My cousins appeared to be amazed. My uncles and aunts appeared to be sincere in their interest. The only people who sat in stunned silence were Vanessa, my parents, and my immediate family. I apologized for disturbing your festivities, but I had to suggest today's special. The truffle risotto costs $80 per plate, but it's really good. It could be a little pricey. As I say this, I look straight at Vanessa, repeating what she said about me being too poor to go. Anger and embarrassment caused her face to flush. Her audience had abandoned her. Everyone's focus was now on me. I'd better go back to work. I said, have fun this evening? I went back to my office and shut the door. I could see the mess I had left behind through the glass. All of my family members were speaking at once. Every time Brian attempted to talk, Vanessa, who was enraged and red-faced, snapped at him. My folks were in a stupor and kept looking toward my workplace. I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment I'd sometimes fantasized about, the big reveal, the shocked faces, the sudden realization that they'd underestimated me all along. But instead, I felt empty. Their approval or disapproval shouldn't matter anymore. I had built a life without them, succeeded without them. What was I trying to prove? I turned away from the window and focused on my laptop, reviewing plans for our newest location. We were expanding to another city next month, our first venture outside the metropolitan area. There was a ton of work left. An hour later, while my family was finishing their desserts, my office phone rang. It was the host station, Miss Mitchell. Your parents are requesting to talk with you before they go. I hesitated, then agreed to visit them. They entered my office, cautiously glancing around at the medals on the walls. The framed restaurant reviews the images of me with Robert at each big opening. This is extremely amazing, Erica, my father responded stiffly. Thank you. We'd like to have supper with you someday, my mother said. At your house. We'd love to see where you reside today. I understood precisely what was occurring. All of a sudden, I was no longer the family failure. I was rich and successful, worth recognizing, worth understanding. I apologize, but I'm now really busy, I informed my parents. My whole focus is on opening a new site. Enjoy your evening. The family gathered outside the restaurant after they departed, and I observed from the window of my office. Clearly irritated that her huge celebration had been overshadowed, my sister was making a lot of gestures. My parents appeared to be in astonishment. The other family members continued to stare back at the eatery, presumably still taking in the situation. My parents left me 3 missed calls and a text message asking when we might meet when I woke up the following Sunday. I didn't answer. My mother left a voicemail and 5 more calls on Monday, recommending lunch at whatever place you choose, sweetie. On Tuesday, my father expressed his pride and desire to re-enter my life. By Wednesday, cousins were receiving calls from aunts and uncles. Amy texted that she was so impressed by my achievement that everyone was talking about me. Linda also phoned to tell that she had always had faith in me. An easy way to change the past. I was going through applications for a new chef post on Thursday morning. An unknown number called on my phone. I replied, Erica Mitchell, against my better judgment. It's Brian, Erica, the husband of your sister. That was not what was expected. Brian, what can I do for you? Let me get straight to the point. My vehicle repair company is growing, as you are aware. Regarding the financing, the bank is being challenging. As a family investment, I was hoping you may be open to lending us $50,000. I almost burst out laughing. Why would I do that too? He responded, well, we're family, as though that clarified everything. And for Vanessa, it would mean a lot. Since Saturday night, she has been agitated. The sibling she had spent years rejecting as useless probably destroyed her moment of fame. Brian, good luck with the bank, but I'm not interested in investing in your company. Erica, hurry up. Now you have money. Would not harm you in order to assist your sister. That's the same sister that publicly referred to me as a loser and said that I couldn't afford to go to her dinner. That sister, a pause occurred. That was not her intention. Vanessa gets, Regretfully, I was aware that I had grown up in adolescence knowing precisely how Vanessa became entitled, harsh, and always supported by our parents. No, I would say, never call again. I ended the call. Vanessa herself phoned less than an hour later. You are a self-centered jerk. Without a preface, she spit. Your refusal to assist Brian is your method of retaliating for your long-standing jealousy of me. Vanessa, I'm not envious of you. I wasn't. So why don't you give us the loan? Obviously, you can afford it. All you want is for us to suffer. I inhaled deeply. This family neglected me for years. Years being told I wasn't worthy, intelligent, or good enough. You suddenly recall that I exist now that you have what you desire. There was a long stillness. Fine, she eventually said. Be that manner. Everyone is discussing how having money has made you cruel and aloof. Your belief that you are too wonderful for your family. Right now, the twisted logic nearly made me laugh. Vanessa, goodbye. After that, I blocked her number right away. The following weeks were filled with work. We hired important personnel, completed the designs for the new site, and adjusted our menu to suit the new market. Robert and I worried about 1,000 details for long days, meetings, and longer nights. My family persisted in their efforts to make amends. My office received flowers. My mother's voicemails were filled with tears. I received an email from my father recalling my childhood achievements, which he had never recognized before. I paid them all no attention. As we went over the design ideas for the new site one evening, Robert stated, you could just have one meeting with them and be done with it. I raised my eyes from my computer. Why would I do that? Because it's distracting you and they won't quit. He was not mistaken. Thoughts of my family kept creeping in even though I tried my hardest to concentrate only on our growth. Recollections of previous slights. Fantasies of telling them precisely what I believed, envisioned discussions where they apologized after years of disrespect and favoritism. What would I even say to them? Robert shrugged. The reality that you don't need them in your life and that you created it without them. Right now, or that you'd like a relationship but on different conditions. Closure could help you move on in either case. Perhaps I admitted, but not just yet. There is too much work for us to do. And we did. The new site was our largest project to date. We were building a gourmet event venue with private dining rooms, cooking lessons, and a rooftop bar in addition to a restaurant. It was big, costly, and just the challenge I needed. On the day we completed the lease, Robert and his wife Diane took me out to celebrate. To fresh beginnings, Diane toasted, lifting her glass, and to the greatest business partner Robert could have found. Robert said, I still find it hard to believe you pitched me that restaurant makeover at the age of 22. I've never made a better choice than to listen to you. I said thank you with a warmth that was unrelated to the wine. For putting your faith in me. For having faith in me when others did not. Diane gripped my hand as she stretched across the table. That is the role of true family. Erica, they believe in you. They support you. They appreciate your triumphs instead of becoming frightened by them. Her comments touched home. The folks at this table, Robert, Diane, our restaurant managers, our cooks, even our regular customers had showed me more support and respect than my biological family ever had. They were my true family, right now. I saw that they were all grinning as I looked around. I understood that neither my sister nor my parents needed to be reconciled. Their late interest in my life and their praise were unnecessary.